Good morning, good day, and good evening to everybody. You're all very welcome to this year's briefing from the Ryan Institute and the Master's Programme on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security here at the University of Galway in Ireland. My name is Professor Charles Spillane. I'm the Director of the Master's Programme on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security here at the University. Each year we've been running these events largely as an exercise to understand what is happening at the climate COP summits each year in relation to the negotiations that are underway, both from the state parties, but also from the non-state party initiatives. And what we do within our master's program is we task our excellent MScCCAFS, or Master's Program on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security students, when analysing in advance what is the lead up to each of the climate COPs, in this case COP30 in Belém in Brazil, and then to provide briefings which will indicate the major issues that are being debated and what the major developments are that are happening within each of the climate COPs. This year we're running two of those briefings, the first of which is today on Wednesday, and then the following one will be next Wednesday, 19th of November. And at the one next week, we'll have an indication of how the COP30 is progressing in Belém. So just a few words from me, I suppose, in relation to each of the COPs and how this, for those who may not be familiar with it. The COP means Conference of Parties. It's the Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Each COP has COP event or summit has a similar format. There are political negotiations between countries, or parties as they're called, and then a parallel world of side events, activities by non-state actors. Because the climate crisis is really pervasive to all sectors of society and the economy, there's an incredibly diverse range of sectors and constituencies who attend the annual COP meetings. I think the number at this year's Belém, Brazil COP30 meeting is perhaps 50,000 attendees. Many of those are government delegations, but then you'll also find private sector, NGOs, civil society, a whole myriad of different kind of constituencies that are represented at COP, because the climate change crisis is really affecting everybody in society. Every day then of the COP has a range of themes. They reflect a diversity of sectors and topics with multiple side events and launching of initiatives. In advance of each climate COP, each climate COP is hosted by a particular government. In this case, it's Brazil this year. Last year was Azerbaijan. So each COP has a presidency action agenda, which is really the host country leading, led by the hosting country. And this consists, in this case, for the COP30 in Brazil, really the presidency's agenda is to mobilize efforts and voluntary climate action from a broader range of actors than beyond just government themselves. So civil society, businesses, investors, cities, states, and so forth. There are 6 thematic pillars to the action agenda and 30 key objectives for those that want to look further into it. However, the backdrop to every climate COP since 1995, when the first COP1 occurred, is that really the greenhouse gas emissions keep rising year on year. Yesterday, the CO2 levels in our atmosphere were 426 parts per million. Back in 1992, when the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was first established, the CO2 levels in the atmosphere were 356 parts per million. The UNEP emissions gap report finds this year that global warming projections over the next century, until to the end of the century, essentially, we're probably headed in a direction of 2.3 to 2.5 degrees warming by end of century. And that's based on a full implementation of national plans, or NDCs as they're called. So this is a reduction on last year's projections. So that's good news. And indeed, Simon Steele, the UN Climate Change Executive Secretary, indicated that we're now bending the curve of planet heating emissions downwards for the very first time. So there's some good news in that sense, but then the pace and the scale of emissions reductions are clearly not at the level to stay within the 1.5 degree target that was agreed in the Paris Agreement. Last week we had the Leaders Summit. We had leaders of a whole range of leaders from different governments, and that was preceding the main summit, which is this week from the 10th of November and next week to the 21st of November. During the Leaders Summit, Antonio Guterres, the head of the United Nations, indicated that the failure to limit global heating to 1.5 degrees is a moral failure and a deadly negligence. And so this is a kind of a key message that the 1.5 degree target, one of the slogans in earlier COPs was keeping 1.5 degrees alive. Whether it's still alive is something that I think everybody should consider in relation to the pace and of the negotiations and the pace of in-country actions to reduce emissions. There's clearly frustration from a whole range of countries, particularly those that have not so much contributed to the global warming problem, but who are in the front line of climate impacts. For instance, Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister, James Marape, has criticised the climate summits as long on talk and short on action. And again, this type of criticism arises quite a lot in the context of what is an important multilateral forum and the only multilateral forum to get states to work together to reduce emissions and build and strengthen adaptation to future climate change and current and future climate change. So if we consider some of the big topics that will be considered at COP30 in Belém and outcomes to watch for, climate finance is really a major topic. It's considered a must deliver at COP30. There's expectations of a new global climate finance goal. And indeed, there is a Baku to Belém roadmap of aspirations and intentions to try and get to $1.3 trillion of climate financing as a target. One of the other topics that it will be very prominent or is very prominent within COP30 is really to focus on nature, forest, land use, and particularly nature-based solutions. And this is understandable given that Brazil is the host of COP30. We'll have seen the Tropical Forest Forever facility being launched at COP30, and that aims to raise about $125 billion to reward countries for tropical forest conservation. Another key topic are the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions. So these are essentially the national climate plans. They contain intentions, and some of which are conditional on financing, of what of the activities to reduce emissions and also build and strengthen adaptation. There's an expectation within the entire process that countries update their NDCs periodically, but they also raise their ambition in a ratchet mechanism, essentially, so that to try that all countries working together can try and stay within the 1.5 degree target, or at least within 2 degrees. However, when we look at the NDCs, many of the NDCs, the ambition could be considered as waning, and so there's a certain stress on the system in relation to that. The other piece is adaptation. There's a global goal on adaptation. A lot of the work at COP30 and between the countries will be really around the indicators by measuring adaptation. So how do we know adaptation is occurring? And there's also some divergences between the countries on the adaptation roadmap, and then this concept of transformational adaptation and also adaptation financing. There are national adaptation plans in addition to the NDCs. 65 countries have now submitted national adaptation plans. Every year, there's a very strong focus on fossil fuel phase out and energy transitions, or this is really at the core in some sense is the transition to a cleaner energy future for the planet and for each of the countries therein and the societies. There's usually quite a lot of stress around that in terms of what can be done, in what time frame, what types of fossil fuels. This year, we'll find that there's an increased focus on biofuels. There's a biofuels pledge that Brazil is leading, supported by some countries. And again, the definitions around sustainable biofuels will be a topic of major interest. Then there's loss and damage. This is reparations for climate impacts on countries, and there's a loss and damage fund. So there's a decision or progress expected in relation to loss and damage funding and support mechanisms. And then finally, there's the global stocktake. The global stocktake is really an effort to take the NDCs and other evidence to see to what extent collectively the actions of individual countries are delivering on trying to stay within 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees. And again, there are challenges. There's a just transition work program, and there's also the global stocktake. And there are challenges around definitions, about what is the scope of these discussions, particularly on the just transition. So in that sense, the just transition, does this only relate to fossil fuel workers, for instance, or does it also include the just transitions for others who are not necessarily working in the fossil fuel industry, who are impacted by climate change? So those types of definitional scope questions are there. They're also, so that's in relation to some of the major topics. There are likely others, but there's some of the major topics that are being negotiated by the countries, the state actors present in Belém. But in addition, there's the parallel world of the side events of the non-state actors, and there are multiple side event initiatives underway every day at COP30 that can be followed by those who have particular sectoral or topic interests. I'll just flag a few of these before I wrap up and hand over to the students. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has announced a 4-year, $1.4 billion investment at COP30 to expand innovations for smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. And then there's a broader food systems transformation, science and philanthropy advisory group that has mobilized about $2.5 billion for transformational activities for resilient and equitable food systems. So there's quite a lot of pledges happening in parallel from non-state actors. Brazil launched the Belém 4X pledge on sustainable fuels, where it aims to quadruple the production and use of sustainable fuels by 2035 relative to 2024. We'll find that GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, will launch its plan to accelerate food systems transformation. The Climate Change and Clean Air Coalition have a side event on super pollutants. We'll find initiatives on breakthroughs in fertilizers and food waste, and indeed many others. This is just really a kind of a snapshot of some examples, but there's a whole range of activities underway, and all of which, and the vast majority of which, are broadcast online and can be followed by those who may be interested. So before I'm handing over to the CCAFS students, the last issue that I would like to highlight in relation to COP30 has been really the strong pushback against climate denialism from many countries, and really a plea for recognizing the scientific evidence and the consensus that exists regarding anthropogenic climate change. And that's implicit within all of the IPCC assessment reports. This issue was flagged by Gabriel Boric, the president of Chile, and he indicated that these are times in which voices are rising that are deciding to ignore or deny the scientific evidence on the climate crisis. And indeed, Luis da Silva, the president of Brazil, the host country, made a plea to make this the COP of truth and explicitly denounced climate denialism and disinformation in his opening remarks. So at that, I'd like to hand over to our really talented students on the Master's Programme on Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security here at the University of Galway, who have been really researching the key issues in the lead up to COP30 and following closely what's been happening since COP30 started last week. And so at that, I'm going to hand over to the students, and thank you all for your attention, and hope we find this briefing useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Professor Spillane. Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching today. The challenge we collectively face is one of unprecedented scale and urgency. The climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. It is a present and accelerating reality. Just last week, Storm Melissa reminded us that record heat, extreme weather, and climate-related disasters are becoming a kind of new normal. These impacts, driven by rising global temperatures, are unfolding faster than our ability to respond. And the economic and human costs are rising every year. Coinciding with the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, COP30 has been described by this year's President, André Correa do Lago, as the COP of implementation, underscoring the fundamental objective of transforming years of negotiation into concrete action. Held in Belém, at the gateway to the Amazon, COP30 will draw global attention to the urgent need to protect the Amazon rainforest, one of our planet's most vital buffers against rising temperatures. COP30 will test the capacity for global cooperation. In an era marked by geopolitical division, conflict, and declining climate ambition, it is critical to reinforce multilateralism and foster collaboration among governments, businesses, and communities to build resilience in the face of intensifying climate impacts. Throughout the history of COP, global agreements have driven progress and accountability. Now, at COP30, we stand at a defining moment, the moment when ambition must become implementation. This briefing was put together by a panel of students. We have Ali from Kenya, Mabior John from South Sudan, Mbene from Senegal, Steffi from India, and myself from Scotland. Today, Ali, John, and myself will be presenting. To provide some context on what the COP process is all about, it is helpful to review its origins, purpose, and some of the key milestones. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, was adopted in New York in 1992 and described as the first step towards creating a safer world. The main goal is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations at a level that prevents dangerous human-induced interference with the climate system. Today, the UNFCCC has near universal membership with 198 parties all working together under the same framework. The Conference of the Parties, or COP, is the UNFCCC's annual decision-making body. Each year, these 198 signatories come together to negotiate collective climate action. The conference plays a critical role in reviewing international cooperation, national emissions inventories, the progress of the parties, and deciding how to strengthen implementation of climate action. Over the years, COP sessions have delivered a series of key milestones and achievements, as you can see here. In 1992, at the Rio Earth Summit, the UNFCCC itself was adopted. At COP3 in Kyoto, Japan, 1997, the Kyoto Protocol was adopted, the first international treaty to set legally binding emission reduction targets for developed countries. COP21 in Paris, France, marked a historic moment with the Paris Agreement of 2015, the central legally binding climate treaty in force today. Its goals are to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, while pursuing efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees, and to require all countries, not just developed nations, to submit nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. So, where do we stand today, 10 years after the Paris Agreement? Between January 2024 and September 2025, 64 countries submitted new or updated NDCs. These plans collectively cover about 30% of global emissions based on 2019 levels. It was the last year before pandemic-related disruptions and the standard baseline used for climate reporting. Despite these submissions, current pledges are projected to reduce global emissions by only 10% by 2035. This is far below what's required to stay on track with the Paris Agreement targets. The first global stocktake, conducted at COP28 in 2023, confirms that if current policies continue, the world is on track for roughly 3 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of the century. So, in short, while progress is being made, current NDCs and policies are insufficient to meet climate goals, highlighting the urgent need for more ambitious action. Thank you for listening. I'll pass on to the next speaker, John.
Thank you, Eleanor. To provide context for the transition to COP30, it is helpful to briefly review the outcomes of COP29, held in Baku in November 2024, which was widely dubbed the Finance COP. Among the key outcomes, there was the new climate finance goal, the central and the most contentious result of COP29. The conference agreed on a floor of $300 billion per year in public finance from high-income countries by 2035 as part of a broader $1.3 trillion per year target from all sources to support low-income countries. Reactions to these were mixed, with many criticizing the figure as insufficient given the scale of climate impacts and cost of green transition. COP29 finalized the technical rules for international carbon markets, a necessary step to unlock finance for emissions reductions projects and strengthen the role of markets in achieving the Paris Agreement. The laws and Damage Fund officially began its work at COP29. The Loss and Damage Fund officially began its work at COP29, although total pledges remained far below the scale needed, with initial capitalization at around $800 million. Progress in other areas remained limited. On mitigation, there was very little new ambition on emissions reductions. Adaptation efforts stalled, particularly in defining the indicators for the global goal on adaptation. And negotiations on a just transition work program were deadlocked, failing to reach agreement on scope and funding. Looking ahead to COP30 in Belém in 2025, the world faces a critical test, translating financial frameworks into real-world ambition and implementation that can keep the 1.5 degrees goal alive. COP30 must drive the development of ambitious 2035 climate plans, secure large-scale climate finance, accelerate adaptation and loss and damage action, and deliver a just, nature-positive transition that protects workers, indigenous rights, and the Amazon rainforest. COP30 is being held in Belém, Brazil from the 10th to 21st of November. It is being held right at the gateway to the Amazon rainforest. There are 50,000 people expected, including journalists, climate scientists, indigenous leaders, and representatives from the 198 parties. The COP30 president is Ambassador Andre Correa de Lago. The location is important for several reasons. Being so close to the rainforest sets the tone for a summit focused on nature conservation and forest preservation. The Amazon has suffered record droughts, wildfires, and deforestation in recent years, yet remains vital as a global carbon sink. Economically, it's also a powerful choice. Brazil is the world's 10th largest economy and 8th largest exporter of oil and gas. So the country's commitment to cutting emissions will be crucial for global progress. But the location hasn't been without controversy. Some rainforest areas were cleared to build new infrastructure for the summit, and with limited accommodation in Belém, poorer delegations have struggled to find housing, to the point where cruise ships are being used to host some participants. COP30 focuses on turning climate promises into action. COP30 has been dubbed as the implementation COP and the Amazon COP. So the core message of COP30, driven by Brazilian presidency, is that the era of setting broad climate goals is over. The focus must now shift entirely to delivery and accountability. The implementation aspect of this COP focuses on nationally determined contributions ambition gap, complex political context, and key implementation-focused outcomes. Thank you all. I'll hand over to my colleague, Ali Omar.
Thank you, John, for the presentation. In this chapter, we'll look about the updates that has been happening in COP30. COP30 in Belém marks a new chapter in global climate actions. Let's explore some of the updates that has been unfolding. The United Nations Secretary General warned that missing the 1.5 target is a moral failure and presented the need for significant commitments. Furthermore, United Nations Climate Chief acknowledged that Paris Agreement is delivering real progress. Launch of Baku to Belém roadmap for setting climate financial targets to 1.3 trillion. The updated NDC synthesis report shows global emissions are now projected to fall by 12% by 2035. United Nations Climate Executive Secretary commented that every fraction of a degree of heating avoided will save millions of lives and billions of dollars in economic damage. Further, on NDC submission, as of 13th November 2025, only 64 countries formally submitted their NDCs. And finally, current pledges achieve only 1/6 of cuts needed for 1.5 degree target as per the United Nations. As we look through this, we need to reflect 10 years of Paris Agreement. The world stands at crossroads. COP30 isn't just another climate summit. It is a test of whether global promises can finally deliver real change. This year, COP30 will address the broader agenda encompassing climate adaptation and mitigation, incorporating food system, gender, nature and biodiversity, and inclusion of indigenous groups. As these broader talks continue, the world is keen on the outcome. So what are these key priority issues and expected outcomes for this year? One, implementation of Paris agreements. So during the plenary, United Nations Climate Change Executive Secretary Simon Stiell stated that COP30 must achieve 3 key objectives. The nation must agree through cooperation on stronger outcomes in all key issues. Furthermore, COP30 must connect climate actions to people's real lives. He ended by mentioning that COP30 should speed up implementation of agreed plans across all the sectors of the economy. Another emerging priority in this COP is scaling up climate finance and reforming financial architecture. Looking at the background, there is a significant gap that persists, especially for climate adaptation in vulnerable nations. At COP29 in Baku, the new collective quantified goal increased the climate finance target from $100 billion to $300 billion, with a focus on supporting developing countries. While the global capital exists, barriers such as high borrowing cost, limited fiscal space, and complex fund access prevent it from reaching the climate solution. Hence, in this COP, there is need to relook into financial system reformation. The aspect around forest biodiversity for climate stability. Hosting COP30 right in the heart of the Amazon puts a powerful spotlight on forest, ocean, and biodiversity, and the urgent need to stop deforestation and restore our ecosystem. One of COP's key focus area, the action agenda, is centered on stewarding forest, ocean, and biodiversity, reminding us that protecting nature is at the heart of climate action. Thirdly, on the aspect around inclusion at the heart of COP30. COP30 is prioritizing the inclusion of indigenous knowledge, local communities, gender equity, and collective capacity for action. COP30 puts people at the center of climate action, focusing on justice, capacity building, and gender equity. It's all about ensuring that every voice matters, especially those of women, indigenous people, and people in vulnerable situations. A crucial progress means no one is left behind. As we understand, energy system is at the center of economic development progress. So it's not all about the energy. COP30 will push for a faster transition to renewables. While some progress has been made, fossil fuel still account for the majority of emissions, underscoring the need for more decisive global actions. Besides, the need to go for adaptation goal. This year, countries are expected to agree on a new global adaptation finance goal, accompanied by quantifiable, measurable indicators under the UAE framework for global resilience. Most importantly, during this COP, The discussion on loss and damage fund will be at the center. COP30 will move the fund for responding to loss and damage from design to delivery. This is the time of walking the talk. Following this, we look forward to witnessing a significant milestones. The formal launch of the Loss and Damage Fund will unlock an initial $250 million to support communities already facing the harsh realities of climate change. This fund is more than just financial aid. It is a lifeline for vulnerable nations, helping them to recover, rebuild, and strengthen resilience in the face of escalating climatic impacts. Looking into opportunities, COP30 in Belém present a vital opportunity to accelerate actions. There are many pathways for success, from stronger policies and technological innovations to enhance climate finance and renewed global commitments. The three examples that we have highlighted here represent only a few among many initiatives driving the progress. Countless others across regions and sectors continue to build momentum towards achieving the Paris Agreement goals and ensuring a sustainable, resilient future for all. So these examples include one, Baku to Belém roadmap for climate finance. On November 5, 2025, the COP presidencies published the Baku to Belém roadmap aiming for a $1.3 trillion. This opportunity will enable finance flow to be better aligned with mutual investment pipelines, allowing the countries to deliver their NDCs with real resources. Secondly, stronger implementation focus and NDC support. COP30 is explicitly framed as the start of an era of implementation, from design to delivery, where countries turn ambition into measurable results. It marks the decisive shift from planning to delivery. The change in focus for the NDCs is into concrete actions that accelerate the clean energy transitions, strengthen institutions and economies, and deliver tangible benefit for the people and for the planet. Furthermore, there are many local and urban action platforms, such as Canopy Pact and Urban City Accelerators. COP30 stand out from previous climate conferences by expanding actions beyond national governments to include cities and local communities as key drivers of climate change. Through initiatives like the Canopy Pact, which connects forest conservation with urban sustainability, and Urban Cities Accelerator, which supports cities in addressing challenges related to heat, emissions, and resilience, COP30 bridges the gap between the nature and urban life. This approach makes the summit uniquely inclusive, linking global climate goals with everyday solutions that protect both people and the planet. As we conclude, COP30 in Belém stands as a reminder that climate action is no longer about promises, but performance. These summits highlight the importance of global cooperation and partnership, bringing nations together to translate commitments into tangible results. With a stronger focus on climate financing, countries are urged to deliver on their pledges and NDCs, ensuring that resources reach those who need them most, especially the world's most vulnerable communities. Ultimately, COP30 pushes us closer to a shared vision, a vision of low-carbon climate-resilient future built on unity, accountability, and determination. Thank you so much for your attention.
Good day, everyone. My name is Dr. Noel Ndlovu. I'm a lecturer in Agribiosciences, Global Food Security, and Climate Resilience at the University of Galway. I would like to start by thanking you for joining us for today's COP30 briefing. hosted by the Ryan Institute at the University of Galway and presented by students of the MSc in Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security. As COP30 continues this week in Brazil, it's already shaping up to be a landmark conference, one defined by implementation, innovation, and inclusion. The opening days have set a positive tone, with countries reaffirming their commitment to collective climate action under Brazil's leadership, and a strong sense of global cooperation driving the discussions forward. One of the real highlights so far has been the launch of several groundbreaking initiatives showing how technology and nature can work hand in hand to escalate progress. The Green Digital Action Hub, anchored in Brazil, was unveiled as a global platform to help countries harness digital innovation for climate solutions, from green technologies to sustainable digital infrastructure. Another exciting development is the AI Climate Institute, designed to empower developing nations to use artificial intelligence for climate resilience. This institute will provide training and digital learning resources for policymakers, researchers, and local innovators, ensuring that AI becomes a tool for equity as well as sustainability. And in the heart of the Amazon, the new Nature's Intelligence Studio has been launched, transforming one of the planet's most biodiverse regions into a living hub for nature-inspired innovation. This initiative links ecosystems, research, and policy, all while supporting local communities and sustainable development. Alongside these innovation milestones, there's been encouraging movement on finance and adaptation. Multilateral development banks have announced that they are doubling their investment in climate resilience, while international partners have pledged more than $2 billion to strengthen smallholder farming and food systems, a vital step toward climate-secure livelihoods. And of course, all of this comes against the backdrop of an escalating climate crisis that continues to intensify both rapid and slow onset disasters, and the impacts are being felt worldwide. Just a few examples from this year alone. Hurricane Melissa has affected over 5 million people across Jamaica, Haiti, and Cuba. And in South Asia, the 2025 Pakistan floods have claimed many lives and destroyed homes. But amid these challenges, there are signs of hope. One particularly important advancement which the students touched on today is the work on the Loss and Damage Fund. The fund was established at COP28 and has already launched a 250 million call for proposal, demonstrating real momentum towards implementation. So as we close today's briefing, I want to extend a warm thank you to our MScCCAFS students for compiling and sharing these updates from COP30, and to Kira Valley for her fantastic coordination and support in bringing this webinar series together. And of course, thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next Wednesday, the 19th of November, 2025, for our second COP30 briefing with more insights and reflections as the negotiations and announcements continue in Brazil. Until then, stay engaged, stay hopeful, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye for now.